May 2019. While the world focused on diplomatic summits, handshakes, and carefully staged photographs between Washington and Pyongyang, another story was allegedly unfolding far from cameras and headlines. According to later investigative reporting, U.S. intelligence quietly explored a covert operation inside North Korean territory, not to strike, not to sabotage, but to listen. The objective was information, not rumors, not assumptions, but insight into the intentions of one of the most opaque leadership circles on Earth. The unit linked to the mission was DEV-U, widely known as SEAL Team 6, America's most secretive maritime special operations force operating under the authority of JSOC. No uniforms, no flags, no official acknowledgement if something went wrong, and one absolute rule governed the operation. If the team was detected, the mission ended immediately. What followed, according to reporting years later, was not a triumph, but a warning about secrecy, escalation, and the thin line between intelligence gathering and catastrophe. Section 1. The green light. DEV-GRU exists to handle missions that cannot fail publicly because, officially, they never happened. This operation was classified as a denied access intelligence. Insertion, no air cover, no drones, no real-time oversight. Once boots or fins left the platform, the team would enter, deploy, and leave without ever being seen. It looked feasible on the ground door, rather. Beneath the water, it bordered on reckless. Inside a secure briefing room thousands of miles from the Korean peninsula, the team leader known only by his calcine, Hawk, stood facing a wall of satellite images, grainy coastlines, annotated tidal patterns, red circles marking locations whose names would never appear in public documents. The target was not a person, not a weapons system. It was a coastal military-linked area believed to receive indirect contact from North Korea's leadership apparatus. The theory was simple. Install passive listening technology, collect metadata, understand intent. The reality was anything but. North Korea was not Iraq, not Afghanistan. There were no permissive zones, no friendly borders, no local assets waiting to assist. Every meter of coastline was watched by soldiers, by civilians, by people who did not know what they were watching for, only that something did not belong. Hawk listened as intelligence officers outlined the political context the White House wanted. Clarity. Diplomacy was ongoing. Missile tests had paused, but trust had not replaced suspicion. This is about verification, one analyst said. About knowing whether talks are genuine? Hawk said nothing. He had learned long ago that when politicians said verification, operators heard risk. The oversight, liaison, an officer representing the Joint Special Operations Command, made the rules explicit. No engagement unless compromised. Pursuit of secondary objectives. No rescue unless total loss of the team is imminent. And then the most important line: if detected at any point, the mission is aborted immediately. Hawk nodded. He understood the unspoken meaning behind the rule. Detection did not mean gunfire. It meant witnesses. It meant escalation. Later, aboard the platform that would carry them toward the peninsula, Hawk gathered his team. They were experienced, quiet men who measured confidence not in bravado, but in preparation. No names were spoken, no speeches made. Hawk simply said, "This is not a strike. This is not a raid. We are guests who must never be noticed." Mason, the most senior operator after Hawk, asked the only question that mattered. "And if we are?" Hawk held his gaze. "Then we leave. Even if it means leaving the mission unfinished," no one argued, because everyone in the room understood the truth. An unfinished mission could be explained. A detected one could start a war, as the vessel slipped beneath the surface days later, carrying the team toward one of the most hostile coastlines on Earth. Hawk felt the familiar tightening in his chest, not fear, but awareness. They were about to step into a space where mistakes did not echo. They detonated. Section 2. The Blackwater Approach. 4 SEAL Team 6. Maritime infiltration is not about speed or force. It is about absence. No sound, no light. No trace that anyone was ever there. The night they entered North Korean waters, the sea offered no mercy. There was no moon, no shimmer of reflected starlight, oily darkness that swallowed distance and distorted depth. From above, the surface looked empty. From below, it felt crowded with invisible risks. The hatch opened, cold air rushed in, sharp and metallic. One by one, the men slipped into the water, their bodies disappearing beneath the surface without a splash. Training took over. Breath slowed. Movements became economical, deliberate. They boarded the wet submersibles, small. Low-profile craft designed not for comfort but for denial. No cabin, no warmth. Just seawater, instruments glowing faint green, and the hum of electric propulsion barely louder than a thought. These vehicles were chosen for one reason. They did not announce themselves. The submersibles moved slowly, hugging the seabed. Sonar use was minimal confirmation only, never exploration. The coastline ahead belonged to a country that treated every anomaly as a threat, and every shadow as a potential invasion. Inside the lead craft, Hawk watched the navigation data scroll past. The maps were precise, but precision in hostile waters was always an illusion. Coastlines shifted. Tides cheated. Human behavior refused to follow patterns. The plan called for synchronization. Submersibles arriving at the release point together, aligned perfectly, spacing exact. From there, swimmers would dismount, take bearings, and make the final approach underwater. That precision lasted until it didn't. The first craft reached, positioned cleanly. The second drifted, not far. Just enough in ordinary circumstances, the correction would have been trivial. But this close to shore, every adjustment created movement, movement created risk. Hawk weighed the options in silence. Abort. No detection yet. But aborting meant returning empty-handed. After months of preparation and political expectation, proceed. Risky but still within acceptable margins, he made the call. Precede the swimmers, detached and slipped free. Becoming silhouettes against the dark seabed, their world narrowed to pressure, distance, and time. Every few meters they surfaced briefly, scanned the horizon. Then submerged again. Nothing. Again. Still. Nothing. Then a light. A thin beam sliced. Across the water's surface, not frantic, not searching wildly, Control.A. Bowed small, civilian-sized Hawk. Froze. Fishing vessels were expected in this region. According to intelligence, most operated on predictable schedules. Most paid little attention to the water beneath them. Most, the light, turned. Closer this time, and then it paused. From the swimmer's perspective, the geometry of the night betrayed them. What appeared distant to the submersible, crew adjusting position now seemed dangerously. Close from below, a figure leaned over the side of the boat. Another followed. Then a splash. Someone entered the water, Hawks. Pulse accelerated not from fear, but calculation. Was it routine? A net check? Night diving for shellfish? Or something else? They had no way to know. No communication with command. No. Drone feed? No overhead. Confirmation. This was the precise scenario planners warned about and quietly hoped would never occur. The diver descended. The distance closed. Too fast. Too close, Hawk. Raised his hand. The signal passed instantly. Through the team, weapons free, no one fired. Yet, because firing meant more than ending a mission, it meant turning a silent intelligence operation into a diplomatic incident that could not be buried easily. But hesitation carried its own cost. If the diver surfaced and spoke, if a radio call went out, if a patrol was alerted, there would be no clean exit. Seconds stretched the diver's shape. Sharpened in the water, recognition flickered. In that moment, theory collapsed under reality. Hawk made the decision he had trained for it but never wanted to make. And with it, the mission crossed a line it could never uncross. Section 3. The moment everything collapsed for Special Operations Units. The most dangerous moment is not contact. It is recognition. The instant when anyone realizes that something does not belong. The diver was close now. Close enough that the shape of his body became unmistakably human. Close enough that Hawk could see the slow, deliberate movement of limbs cutting through the water. This was not an accident, not a splash from a careless fisherman. Someone was looking. Hawk felt time compress. Rules of engagement existed for moments like this. But rules assumed clarity, and clarity was the one thing missing. No insignia, no weapons visible, no way to know whether the man in the water was a civilian, a militia auxiliary, or something far worse. What Hawk didn't know was this. If the diver surfaced and spoke if, a signal was sent if, even a question was raised, there would be no quiet withdrawal. The mission would not merely fail, it would detonate. Hawk gave the signal. The sound was muffled, contained, almost gentle beneath the surface. The diver stopped moving above. The boat reacted instantly. The light jerked wildly, slicing across the water in erratic arcs. Voices rose sharp, startled, confused. The night was no longer neutral. It was awake. Hawk did not wait for confirmation. Abort, he signaled. The word rippled through the team like an electric shock. Training snapped them into motion, collapsing the formation. Abandoning the objective without hesitation or argument, the device was still. Secured. Nothing had been planted, nothing gained, but something had been lost. The swimmers turned back toward the extraction point, kicking hard, bodies heavy now with urgency. The sea, moments ago, a cloak, became an obstacle. Above them, the fishing boat's engine roared to life. Another light appeared farther down the coast. Then, another. Whether coincidence or response didn't matter anymore. The distinction meant nothing once eyes were on the water. The shoreline itself remained dark. That worried Hawk more than the boats because trained militaries did not panic. They waited. The submersibles came into view. One was perfectly positioned. The other wasn't. It had drifted slightly during the commotion. Its orientation off by just enough to complicate boarding. Not catastrophic, but dangerous under pressure. Men loaded fast. No wasted movement. No, shouted orders. The second submersible corrected course. But not before Hawk caught something on the edge of his awareness, a vibration, low frequency. Not engines.sonar.crude, short dash range. But active. Someone on shore had decided to stop. Guessing. Hawk felt his throat tighten. This was the moment planners feared most, not detection, but escalation without confirmation. The kind of gray zone response that left operators guessing how close they were to a full military reaction. The submersibles moved. Faster. Now riskier. But speed mattered less than distance. Above them, propellers churned. Shapes crossed overhead. Water pressure shifted as vessels passed too, close for comfort. The emergency beacon remained silent. Activating it would confirm something hostile had happened. And once that confirmation existed, it could not be erased. But then the second submersible jolted. Not an explosion. Not a strike. A collision with submerged debris or seabed contour, hard to tell. The craft shuddered. Then continued. Hawk made the call. Emergency extraction. The beacon transmitted a burst. So brief it barely existed, an encrypted whisper into the ocean's noise, far beyond the peninsula. Something massive changed course. The mother submarine responded, but submarines do not turn like speedboats. They adjust. Slowly, deliberately, and Every kilometer closer to shore increased risk. Submersibles descended deeper, hugging terrain, letting darkness and depth do what stealth no longer could alone. The sonar faded. The engines overhead receded. Minutes later, the sea opened into deeper water. The recovery was violent in its efficiency. Hatches opened. Arms reached down. Bodies were hauled inside. The last man cleared the hatch seconds before it sealed shut. The submarine slipped away, descending once more into silence. Inside, the men sat in exhausted stillness, breath ragged, faces pale beneath red emergency. Lights. No one spoke. No, one needed to. The mission was over. Not because it failed, but because it could not continue without consequences. No one was prepared to accept. Above them, the sea smoothed itself, swallowing evidence, erasing disturbances. But the night had changed something, and nothing would ever fit back into place the way it had before. Section 4. The mission that could not be admitted. 4 SEAL Team 6. Extraction is never the end of a mission. It is only the point where consequences begin. The submarine moved silently away from the Korean peninsula, descending to a depth where pressure crushed sound into nothing. Inside, heaters hummed softly as soaked gear was stripped and stowed. Medics checked hands and feet for frostbite, eyes for shock, lungs for seawater. Everyone was alive. That fact alone felt strangely hollow. Hawk sat alone in the forward compartment, towel draped across his shoulders, staring at a metal bulkhead etched with scratches from decades of unseen voyages. His body had stopped shaking. His mind had not. He replayed the moment again and again, not the shot itself, but the second before it. The fraction of time where another outcome might have existed, if only the universe had been kinder. But it hadn't. A door slid open behind him. The mission oversight officer and intermediary between JSOC and the political chain above it stepped inside. He wore no tactical gear, no weapon, just a clipboard and the burden of authority. They noticed increased maritime activity for 3 hours, the officer said quietly. No alerts, no broadcasts, nothing public. Hawk nodded. They knew something was wrong. Did they know who? No. The officer exhaled, relief and dread tangled together. Good. He hesitated before continuing. We need a preliminary assessment. Hawk's jaw tightened. Of what? Of what happened. Phrase carried weight. Not why. Not whether it should have happened. Only what a carefully chosen word designed to avoid accountability. Hawk stood. We were compromised by unexpected civilian presence. Mission parameters required immediate abort. And the contact? Hawk met his eyes. Fatal. The word echoed in the narrow compartment. The officer looked away. Was there any alternative? In theory, Hawk replied. Not in practice. Silence settled between them. This never leaves classified channels, the officer said finally. No after-action report beyond JSOC. No distribution to congressional oversight unless requested. Hawk stiffened. That's not protocol. The officer's expression hardened. Neither was authorizing this mission in the first place. Hawk understood then. This was not about truth. It was about containment. Later, Hawk gathered his team in the operations bay. They sat in a loose semicircle, wrapped in thermal blankets, faces drawn and pale. No one spoke until Hawk did. The device was never placed, he said. The mission is a total loss. It's no reaction. There was civilian contact, he continued. Fatal, that ends any debate about success. Mason looked down at his hands. Reed stared at the deck. This does not go beyond this room, Hawk said. Not because it's a secret, but because no one outside this room can carry it responsibly. Someone laughed softly. Not humor. Release. What happens now? Mason asked. Hawk answered honestly. Now it becomes something that officially never happened. Days later, the submarine docked under cover of darkness. The team dispersed without ceremony. No debrief with fanfare. No public recognition, no acknowledgement at all. The summit in Vietnam went ahead as planned. Cameras rolled. Hands shook. Headlines spoke of peace and potential. No one mentioned the water. No one mentioned the fishermen. In intelligence circles, the operation was quietly buried beneath layers of classification and careful wording. Analysts debated hypotheticals. Lawyers discussed thresholds. Planners added footnotes to future proposals, but no document could fully capture what had occurred, because the real lesson was not tactical. It was political. The mission had revealed something. Dangerous not about North Korea, but about the illusion of control, that elite units could be inserted into the most sensitive spaces on Earth and withdrawn cleanly. Without leaving fingerprints on the world, that secrecy could erase consequence. Hawk knew better now. As the months passed, the mission became a shadow referenced obliquely, never named. A cautionary tale without a title. But shadows have a way of resurfacing, and one day, someone would decide that silence no longer served them. Section 5. When silence broke. For operations like this, time is supposed to be an ally. Months pass, memories dull. Documents sink deeper into classified vaults. But time has another habit. It loosens tongues. Years later, long after the submersible wakes had faded and the coastline had returned to routine vigilance, fragments of the story surfaced, not through official channels, not through press conferences, through whispers. A line here, a confirmation there, a phrase carefully attributed to officials familiar with the matter. When the article finally appeared, it did not accuse, it did not confirm. It suggested that was enough. The headline avoided specifics. It spoke of a reported covert attempt, of a mission that may have occurred, of special operations forces allegedly operating near North Korea during a sensitive diplomatic window, and buried in the text halfway down the page where the words Hawk had known would eventually escape. 3 local fishermen. Hawk read the article alone, late at night, the glow of the screen reflecting off a window that showed nothing but his own tired face. The details were imperfect. Some timelines were wrong. Some assumptions wildly off. But the core was intact. Something had happened, and someone had decided the public deserved to know at least partially. Within days, the reactions began. Former officials denied knowledge. Spokespeople issued non-denials. Analysts argued over plausibility. Some insisted the mission was impossible, too risky, too reckless. Others said that was exactly why it sounded true. Inside government circles, the response was quieter but sharper. Congressional staffers asked careful questions. Oversight committees requested briefings. They were technically voluntary, but practically unavoidable. Not because the article proved wrongdoing, but because it suggested loss of control. For DEVGRU, this was the most dangerous phase of any. Operation not insertion, not contact, but narrative. Hawk was summoned to a secure facility outside Washington. No insignia. No introductions. Just a long table, a handful of officials. In a clear understanding that this conversation would never be quoted. The public doesn't need confirmation, one civilian advisor said. But Congress needs reassurance. Reassurance of what? Hawk asked. That this was an anomaly, another replied. Not a precedent. Hawk leaned back. Then, stop treating intelligence like a dare. The room fell silent. Another official spoke carefully. Do you believe the mission should have been approved? Hawk did not hesitate. Technically. Yes. Strategically. No. The distinction made them uncomfortable. Because someone pressed. Because it confused capability with wisdom, Hawk said. Just because we can go somewhere doesn't mean we should. Outside the room, the media cycle churned on. Within weeks, attention shifted. New crises replaced old ones. The article became a reference point. Not a headline, but the damage or correction was already done. Operational authorizations slowed. Legal reviews thickened. Layers of approval reappeared where speed had once been. Celebrated, younger officers asked different questions. Now, not how fast, but why, Hawk noticed. The shift most clearly during a classified briefing months later. When a junior planner hesitated before proposing an aggressive option, "What's the political end state?" the officer asked. That question would have been unthinkable before the mission had failed in its objective. But it had succeeded in something else. It reminded the system that secrecy is not immunity, that even the quietest actions ripple outward into families, into diplomacy, into history, and that some truths, once whispered into the dark, will eventually find daylight. Section 6. The room where decisions were rewritten. 4 SEAL Team 6. Accountability never arrives with sirens or headlines. It arrives in rooms without windows, where voices stay low and words are chosen like weapons. Hawk sat at the long table, posture straight, hands folded. The men and women across from him represented different branches. Different authorities, uniformed officers, civilian officials, legal advisors. No one introduced themselves. They didn't need to. This was not a trial. There would be no verdict. But the weight in the room felt heavier than any courtroom. "We're not here to assign blame," the chair began. "As these sessions always did, we're here to understand decision-making." Hawk had heard the line before. They walked through the timeline. The authorization, the insertion, the unexpected presence near the extraction point. The moment compromise became unavoidable. No dramatics, no embellishment, just facts. One official leaned forward. "At what point did the mission become unrecoverable?" Hawk answered without hesitation. "The moment a civilian entered the water. At that point, intelligence collection was no longer compatible with strategic stability." Another voice followed, but the rules allowed for self-defense, as Hawk said. They did not allow for continuation. A pause. A senior officer spoke next. "Do you believe the team acted within doctrine?" "Yes, within law." Hawk took a breath. "Within the authorities we were given?" That distinction landed hard. The chair nodded slowly. "That is precisely the concern. Because doctrine could be rewritten. Authorities could be reinterpreted. But consequences once unleashed could not be recalled." The discussion shifted. Less about the mission itself, more about what it represented. A civilian advisor spoke quietly. "This operation existed at the intersection of intelligence and provocation. That space is shrinking." Hawk listened. Another added, "If this had gone public in real time. Escalation models suggest outcomes we were not prepared to manage." Silence followed. Everyone in the room understood what that meant. The meeting ended without conclusions only. Recommendations. Stricter authorization thresholds. Clearer. Political sign dash-offs. Slower timelines. The very things operators had been trained to resent. As Hawk stood to leave, the chair stopped him. "You understand," the man said carefully, "that nothing discussed here will ever be officially acknowledged." Hawk nodded. "I wouldn't expect it to be." The chair studied him. "Do you regret it?" Hawk considered the question longer than expected. "I regret believing precision could replace restraint," he said. That answer followed him out of the room. Outside, Washington continued as if nothing had happened. Traffic moved. Phones rang. Decisions were made about wars most people would never see. But inside the system, something had shifted. The mission would not be remembered as a failure. It would be remembered as a boundary. Section 7. Final. What remains after the silence? Time passed. Careers moved forward. Some men retired. Some took quieter assignments. The mission faded from briefings. Then from memory except where it mattered. For DevGru, there were no medals for restraint. No citations for aborted operations. The culture still prized success, still celebrated daring. But now, caution had a seat at the table. Hawk noticed it in the language. Phrases like second order, Effects replaced speed. Escalation control replaced initiative. The change was subtle but permanent. Years later, Hawk sat alone on his porch, watching the late afternoon light fade. His phone buzzed with a message from someone he hadn't spoken to in years. "Mason here. You see the new doctrine draft?" Hawk smiled faintly. "Yeah, took long enough. They never mentioned the mission by name. They didn't need to, across the Pacific. Patrol boats still traced familiar routes. Fishermen still worked dark waters. Leaders still weighed risks behind closed doors, believing history could be nudged gently. In the right direction, but Hawk knew better now. History does not respond to nudges. It responds to pressure and breaks where it is weakest. The lesson of that night was not about elite units or failed intelligence. It was about humility, about understanding that some doors, once tested, do not open quietly, and that silence, real silence, is sometimes the most responsible outcome. Hawk stood, turned off the porch light, and stepped inside. The night remained calm. No alarms, no headlines, no secrets clawing for air, just quiet. And the knowledge that somewhere, deep in classified archives and unspoken memory, a mission that never officially existed had done exactly what it was meant to do. It warned those who came after.